What done to Jim Drink to Marba?
Bless it.
Jim Drink to somebody when somebody tell of Lucia, Taba to be larger than the telephone. Taba to you look more than to Tijibito. Tijibito, the Ladunga to Gunu and somebody, and like you with somebody, Dunga to Gunu and somebody. Do then queen, you made a Gunu queen with somebody. That Gunu queen with somebody. Nyomobongos more less with you. Chibo, Joel, and Marba. What that and what data? What did you shall know? What the Gazon Chibo, Joel, and Marba?
So once again, we're looking at Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stage of the path to enlightenment. And specifically the section on training the mind in the stage of the path shared in common with beings of medium capacity. So when we look at that outline, we begin with a major, four major headings rather. So the first is the mental training. The second is the measure of the determination to be free, or the measure of one's renunciation. And then the dispelling misconceptions is the third category. And then the fourth is ascertaining the nature of the path leading to liberation. So these are the four major categories that we find in the Great Treatise. And if we look at the first category, which is the mental training is divided into two categories. The first is the identification of what the determination to be free is, or the identifying renunciation, the mind intent on liberation. And then the second category is the method for actually developing renunciation, or the mind intent on liberation. So under that second category, we then find also subcategories, which are there's actually two. The first category is reflection on suffering and its origin, and then the second category, reflection from the viewpoint of the 12 links of dependent origination. So the first category, reflection on suffering and its origin, is divided into two parts: reflection on the truth of suffering, the faults of cyclic existence, and then reflection on the process of cyclic existence in terms of origin. And then reflection on the truth of suffering, we find two parts: the significance of the Buddha's asserting the truth of suffering is the first among the Four Noble Truths, and then the second category, which is the actual meditation on suffering. And we go through that section where we find the 3 sufferings, 8 sufferings, 6 sufferings, 8 sufferings. And once we complete that, then we get to the reflection on the process of cyclic existence in terms of origin. So that's the section that we're dealing with right now. And that can be divided into 3 parts. First is how afflictions arise. Second category is how you thereby accumulate karma. And then third category is how you die and are reborn. So these are the sections that we'll be going over, and where we left off, the section in which we left off. Okay.
Nibachi, Saint La Sonset.
Nicha.
Payjan and Yaja Jitushini. Nibachi, Saint La Sonles, what the net. Ancient and good Kuzutan and Kuzutade.
Nicha, Sunju Sunje. And then Rinpoche called the Buik.
242.
You know, the Tsikare.
Simogudma. Gulmatin, Jabadandua. Nibachi, Saint La Sonles.
Okay. All right, so we are on 242. So Rinpoche told me to just make sure everybody has the English page. So we're starting. So Semla soon. 242. 42. Okay, so we're on page 307 in the English. Sorry about that.
Well, because I'm got there, I'm going to hold that there. Nibachi sent us only. Tachi, not to send the duel, Taki sent out the Beguneshoa, Magi sent out the Beguneshoa, Lomat sent out the Beguneshoa, what the song would do, what the leg do, not bad.
So when we look at the mind at death, we can see that the mind at death can be divided into various categories. A virtuous state of mind at death, a non-virtuous state of mind at death, and then a neutral mind at death, or a mind at death that has not been presented in Scripture.
What then my Tom with the leg doggy, what the geese and the Beguna show at the Lanjan, or the Sajinga Jidua, Sajinga Rurus, and Cousin Chinsare, Aljajina, what they Yan Shin Gundo Sajinga and that on with the geese and them geese and the Perchoa, Rangi Tamba, Janji Tan to Juba Yan Ronde, Tebalas would be Giju. De Raban Jon Pato, Saint Lacun de Jabo, so what the Tombetre, Tagi, and the Gunesha said the Karasukure, and what the Gawat and the Shakalam, the Gawasu Tamba in and Ramadena, and the Jenda go to Gawasantan was what the Lone and Chisen Raba. Chisen the Tamu the Rabanigan, Chisen Rabi goes so, never go out there, geese and sent them in Chesona, what the geese and them going to show Tombatim, but
so we're going now on page 307 to number 2, the mind at death. So dying with a virtuous mind. So this section in Jayan Sheba's commentary, we find 5 categories presented. So the first category is this sentence in the Lamrim Chenmo. Those who die with virtuous minds, whether through remembering on their own or through being reminded by others, turn their minds to virtues such as faith, for as long as coarse discrimination, ordinary types of consciousness remains. So this is the first category, and it's dealing with a mind that through that person's own previous virtue is virtuous at the time of death, or if they're unable to remember themselves, if they're reminded by others, and then they have a virtuous mind. This is another way in which this virtuous mind can be present. And this category deals only with the time where coarse discrimination is still present. So when we look at the mind at death, and we look at consciousness itself, coarse conscious, there are 2 types. There's coarse consciousness and subtle consciousness. So this is only referring to the time where there is still coarse consciousness present. So there hasn't been, as a note, there hasn't been a transition from the coarse consciousness to the subtle consciousness yet. There's still, the person who's dying is still has the kind of ordinary type of consciousness.
What the Juan to so do what the Chenrezig is a mother. Satchulatin, Chu, Sai Joan, Chu, what the main Yon to Longan to so now because the Chenrezig is a mother. He said that they were going to say what the Sukos is that is. That Chesen Tamate and Han Kalamatan Yato Nalamba Kasu better. And then Palton be called about the Shu Zakuno Yosaris, what in Maton do, kalhanda jima mero mal temba de mer zaku no le aton du cheba malamba ni kal do su di bisinye to de na ton de mero ta de jogo de le de na USS to de cheba USS to de todon de da keji mama do USS maro de cheba chesen chamse do de inzare de la loma de Charles na gawada mago yo mares Gisenda de Gudisha said, she said, Rabico to this, what the so said it.
The Dead Sea, the Corlo.
Talent is a saturated.
Lassa.
Say, you want the Nabag, that's over she. Ne shiraz sadu mebachan wo ma sa shin ti ba sai zeni ji sai rajin de chabun de chi wo wa sa shin ti ba wo de ne ba sai yong de nya chu nya ye ba de sa chula ti ba se des wo de zu ne ba ge zu de shira ge ne lablo de chanu ma do
Then the trauma the
sa chu ji 다초 전에 초대 말라틴의 뒤에는 카단 도들 축간이야. 만들고 라틴의 조불 차부터 냐는데야. 조불 잠이 차는 거 말이야. 로드 나실 라틴도 오시는 거다. 오디 제스는 로 나실 때 봐이제와. 대주고들 나 갈람바다 제발만 하면 내가 손주는 거서 말봐. 대주고도 요새래 말봐.
Lampa.
네. 야.
Lampa. Nene. The Corlo, the Yanjus.
다 자쿠슈 자쿠여서 어떤 팔 때문에 코아도 봐요서다. 될 오만 말해오도 나 칼람바스 장한다 지용만. 말 때문에 어디 코아도 막이 또 자쿠도 봐지면로 야동도 집어만한바 말한다면. 그러니까 무슨 뒤용도 나통 네토 대주도 요새는 무슨 말이야. 요새도 되게 계지만 로마데 비차스 도와요 말이스. 도와도 먹어요 말이야. 제생 처음도 어때서?
So when we look at what the difference is between a coarse state of consciousness or a coarse awareness and a subtle awareness, when there is coarse awareness, we're referring to when there is the dissolution process that's still going on among the four elements. So when this process is going on, when these elements dissolve into one another, during that period of time, this is considered an ordinary state of consciousness. It doesn't become a subtle state of consciousness until one actually reaches the union of the lower. I have to look this vocabulary. The upper and lower drops coming together, where there is actually the clear light mind. So that clear light mind itself is actually the subtle consciousness, the subtle awareness. So this is the difference between two. So the two. So the process is that when one is at the time of death, at that point, the elements begin dissolving into one another. The earth element dissolves into the water element. The earth element's necessary for rigidity. So when one loses the earth element, at that point in time, the body begins to kind of slump, or I don't know what the exact word would be, but loses its strength, its rigidity. And then after that, the water element dissolves into the fire element. So when this takes place, the mouth becomes very dry, and one loses the moisture in one's body, and specifically starting with the water in one's mouth. And then after that, the fire element dissolves into the wind element, and that wind element itself is so the fire element dissolves into the wind element, and then when that takes place, the warmth in the body then is no longer there. So the warmth leaves, and then the wind then dissolves, and after the dissolving of the wind, then the breathing in and out is no longer there. At that point in time, then there is a transition towards the subtle type of consciousness when these chakras at the various points of the crown and then the crown chakra and the lower chakra where there are drops, and then the crown drops descends and the lower drops ascend and then unite, and then this union is the clear light mind, and that clear light mind itself is considered this subtle type of consciousness. And that subtle type of consciousness is necessarily not virtue or non-virtue. It's always that which hasn't been presented in Scripture. So it's ethically neutral. That's how they're translating it in the Lamrim Chenmo. There's a couple of, Rinpoche explained, there's actually a vocabulary for that process that I'm missing, so I have to look that up. But I think that it's clear. It's that union of the energies. It's sometimes translated as ascending and descending and then uniting when the clear light mind is present. And at that time we have that subtle consciousness. And Rinpoche also gave the definition of earth, and it's that which is hard and stable. It's something like that. I think that's the translation of the definition. I don't have it here from my Dudra, but hard and obstructive is the definition of earth element. Sa Shing Tepa, hard and obstructive. So that's everything. Bigson Rinpoche.
That's such a teacher, Manolatin, no Uja, but so Chenriba took it out, language, the Chenriba, sense man, not bad. Then how Kalamba, the Cheba Malamba, the Neto, you said so, Chenriba killing with the man Haku.
So these 4 stages that I'm missing the names for, and I apologize. So the science is able to recognize these kind of core stages where we have the elements of the earth into the water, and water into the fire, and fire into the wind. And at that point where the breathing in and out stops, and then the next part of the towards the subtle consciousness happens, science no longer really has an assertion of what that next process is. So there isn't a description of this these awarenesses, these process of more subtle ascension and descension that then realizes the clear light mind. So that process to the clear light mind, after the wind element has dissolved, hasn't really been explained by science. Okay, decent.
What did that get sent that they were going to show the Langan Thomas Chin? Niba the Nere Niba Guada Magawa Shibi, Kanza Choane, Rangi Jamba, Jenji Temper, Shejan Ronde. Quand les motos comme le chebate qui tout dans d'embar jute de saint la jola jeune jebanjurosa tani badro de gi saint magi saint de gun chawatla na diba chibusagin na da gawa chibusagin na da na diba chibusaba ina what the diba chibukin David Ngel Mungure, Goa Chibusagina, Goa and David Ngel Mungures, Temba Genji, Temba Shejan Ronte, Hunkan Lamoto, Combra Shibate, Chito Demba, and Gil El Comba Chichuba Ina, ane to to de ba yong gore magi le komba che bo yona che to de ba jode de sen la jo la jen je ba jo jen da nga je ne gres wo de ni bare.
So number 2 is the next sentence in Jayan Sheba's outline, number 2. In the case of death, for those who have cultivated either virtue or non-virtue unequally, they either remember on their own or are reminded by others what they have become accustomed to do repeatedly in the past, and this becomes extremely powerful. So this is referring to the virtue that's cultivated because someone has engaged in both virtue and non-virtue, but he or she is more familiar with virtue and more familiar with accumulating virtue. So therefore, at the time of death, they are able to have a virtuous state of mind. Or if they have been more familiar with virtue than non-virtue, but still don't remember that or don't have that state of mind present because of not remembering at the time of death, then if they're reminded by others of their previous familiarization with virtue, if they've engaged in it in more than non-virtue, then that would create that virtuous state of mind at death. So this is category number 2, is if the virtue has been familiarized with more so than the non-virtue. And if one familiarizes oneself more so with non-virtue, then the same holds true, that at the time of death, there would be a non-virtuous presence.
Leji ko chikan de nyawa ka to komba kans ne leji ko chewa ne dibi le chewa diba chebo gwa le chebi ina debun ngel me ngures wode somba de le do leji nzu leji ko chikan de nyawa ka to komba kans chewa sana gwa ina gwa chebo diba ina diba chebo ro what the Gawachibi Sasha Yona, Gawang Ribangan Mungure, Dibachibu Sasha Bayuna, Dibin Ribangan Mungures, what the Nibadal Tele Dua Cheto Deba, Judijan Jeba Juros, Nibache.
That's so.
Tasumbar was Gawata Magi, Lenikal, Combat Jam Chibaina, Gay Leta, and a Dibi Leni, what the Chichun Jiba Rediona. Nikala Tsumba Guna ne, Tambu Khan Tamba Tele, Tuba Manjude, Saint Jean to Manju Kos, what did Sumba Terendo Sumba? Kuni Kumba Jamba Radio, Tambu Khan Tamba taken Debingham Milk. Gile Tamba Tansona, Gile and Debingham Gure, Dibi le Tamba Tansona, and the Dibi and Debingham Gures, Diba Guani, Chiba Radio. Diba Chishun, Chiba Radio, Nika, Tsumba Kona ne, Tambu Kantamba Tele, Duba Manjude, Tele Gent Manjukos, what the Sumba Tre.
Bless him. So next, so this sentence, their minds become absorbed in this and forget all else, is connected to number 2. So I apologize, I didn't read that next sentence. So number 3 is, if they are equally familiar with both virtue and non-virtue, then they cannot stop remembering what they remember first and cannot engage their minds in anything else. So here, this is number 3, where there's an equal familiarity. But they remember, the first thing that they remember is the virtue. So the virtuous state of mind is present, just because of the, it's almost like the word random. It's random. It just came up first. So in that case, it's present. If there's this equal, where there isn't more familiarization with one or the other.
Da Jeba, Jeba ne Gawashibanes, Tajeba to what in the Gawashiba tenre, Jeba Gawashiba ne Mertun and Hawan Roatan Dala, Chi Tuna Tella Manata Bu, Zu Maduba Maimba, Hidonwa, Hasu Junatan, and the Wacho and Jude, Chegati, Lula, Dungaja Tua, Trabamunong, so what they. He said that they were going to Chiba, he said that they were going to Chenrezig, nowadays, and Chenrezig Chisi, but the Honkaru or Sana, and Oku, San what the and Nahun by Yamasha Salvan, then now you orders, Merchant Yamasha, Roa, now you orders, and the cool now Zoom, Duba, and my Mazu, he don't want how to orders, and Kushakalam, who said, Lil Kangayo, Maris. What the recognition of grace, what the case had the Bugune Gawashibane, Mertune, Honro dance, and Nahun by Yamashas and Roda, Hoyores, Dallas, Chi Tuna, Manatabi, Zuma, Duba, my Bakuzu, you don't want how the grace, Jumatan, and the watcher and Jute with the pot and Rimit Chendwa. The watcher and Jude, Chegati, Lula, Dungan Tua, Trabuman, Chegati, Lul, Dungan Trabu Mares. What about what the Jibatre?
So now we move on to number 5. Those who have cultivated virtue seem to pass from darkness into light. As they die, various pleasant and attractive images appear as though in a dream. They die comfortably, and at the point of death, intense feelings of suffering do not arise in their bodies. So here, so this is category number 4, and it's saying that if one who has cultivated virtue, when they're dying, it seems like there goes from a very dark place where everything is dark, like night, dark like night, and then it's as if the sun shines. So sun rays come. It's as if sun shines would be literal translation. Nimu. So the sun shines. So there's this transition from this darkness into sunlight or sunshine, and then the images that they see are all very attractive and desirable images, as opposed to undesirable things or unattractive things. So the forms that they see are very attractive.
This one.
Tiksan.
What Nabatene, Leber Sheba Nane, Naju Shindu, Sao Chua, you know, what Nabatere, Giles again to so what the sheets. Ne dungan chujun yin des, dungan chibuyo ma des. Na so shindu chungwa yin no, what about ngabare?
And number 5 is the last sentence. For those who are currently doing what is right, the final agony of death is minimal. So those who are familiar more with virtue don't have a large amount of suffering when they die. I think it's large amount of feelings of suffering.
Magi senda de ko chewa de la jaji saji tu de ndo saji tu de tambu de no tambu Magi senda de ba chewa ne rangi temba ha yen je tan du ju ju no de ngama gwa de da bu do
ga zi de nga yan je nga yi be ga zi yi be zhu okay gong de
Magi senda de ba zhu de
lesser
Roji Tambu de Magi Sandon Dembe, Magi Sandon Dember Chawane, Rangi Jamba, Jenji Tandu Jujon de, Chasuji, Magawa Jamba Nan, Dushe Raba Ju, Bado, Jongshins, Chikati, Lula, Dungan Tua Trabu Nuatan, Dungan Tua Trabu Nuatan, what about Tambu de Resha Tambo? Magi Sandon Dembe Rangi Jamba, and then Hedge. Susi Diba Saba the Rang Temba in and Ra, and the Rang Madena Agenda should Diba to Saywaras, to Silaba Ina could Diba Saba Tangrota. What the Tanjan Ronde Chasuji Magua Tamba, Chasuji Magua Tamba, Dushe Raba Ju Batu Jungshin, Chesen Raba Gosu Yungres, Chesen Tama Gosu Yungmarvata, Raba Gosu Jungshin, Chigati Lula, Dungaji Sua Trapa Yunga Tans, Watabatu, Tombo Treja Tombo.
So now we move on to number 2, dying with a non-virtuous mind. So when we look at Jayan Sheba's commentary, he divides this section into 6. So the first category is those who die with non-virtuous minds, whether through remembering on their own or through being reminded by others, remember non-virtue, such as attachment, for as long as coarse discrimination remains. So it's similar to the last section on virtue, where if that coarse type of consciousness at the time of death is present, and the person either remembers on their own the non-virtue that they've engaged in, so they abide with a non-virtuous state of mind, or is reminded by someone about it, and then as a result of that remembers and then abides in a non-virtuous mind at the time of death. So this is category number 1 of 6.
What the Yanjibu, what the Batul Saji Digdo, Yunga Tans, Chila Jundina Chimendo, the Katula Saji Digdo. And Chigati Lula, Suatabo, Yunga was Loguena, Yunga Tans, what the Saji Dombre. Taniba, Magi, Le Sheba, Cheese, Mago Sakin, Kanza the cheese, and Mago Hasheba, Leji, JB Hatina, the Notesa, Magi sent them with cheese, and then Hans Sasha, Diva Mago at the Hati, Noa Dujate, and the Kusen, Noa the Yungres, Hatina, the Notes. Malajin to Zuma Duba, Malajin to Kulu Dujat and Hawan Gres, Malajin to Zuma Duba Toma, Telatawan Jude, Hawan and Metrit and Nahune, Nimashas and Nahulban Ruting and Hawan Yores, go out and Rabanda Bro, Marva, Kabalu.
Then Nipa,
what the Maggie, Le Sheba. Cheats, Maggie Le Sheba, cheats, what the Katul Yajibi Saji Jindua, Maggie Le Sheba, cheats, and Magua Hashebi Leji, JB Hatina, and Maggie Legend Hati Galukula, and Dungan Hati the Kul Yongres, the Notes, Malajento. And of course, Zoom Doja Montagres, Zoom Duba, Toman Hawan Jute, Hawan and Metro and Rod and Rose, Nemashas and Nahulban Jute again, Hawan Yuares, the Haman Goasia Sagent, Nahun Yamashagan Roanaji, Deba Sagent, Yamashas and Nahun Pandu again, Hawan Yuares. What did you about it?
You can say that's NGK that. It's Nipa, the Dungyal Mambo, Nipa, the Dungyal Mambo Yongdu, the Beik.
Nipa Magua Sheba, Cheatsene, Magua Haji Leji, JB Hati Na, the Note, Malajin to Zuma Duba. Tomatala Tawan Jute, Tawane, Merchoton Road and Rose, what the Niba.
The Chika de La Dungelgi, Sorwa, Drapo, Nyonwa, Dan, Megewe, Le Jake, Bigare.
What did each you have with the sweet, huh? Megi Le Sheba Cheats, Magua Haji Leji, JB Hati Na, the Notes, Mala Karinugars and Malajin to Kula Zoom Duba Montangres, 도만 상황 주대
Okay.
하디도 어때 말보다 근데 상황에 맞췄던 거다 옷이 바르니 봐
Yine chaso ki megewa. Yine it's different.
차수스 때 담아래
네.
차수지 먹어나 저 먹이세 저거 나네 담으들어 담보
네네 체카 데일.
제가 뒤를 런지 소화 잡은 용어 담으들어 담보
네 담보.
담으래 담보
네.
용어 담서 대체 담으래
Okay, decent. All right. So I'm looking at what the breakup in sentences are. So Rinpoche is saying that in Jayan Sheba's commentary, the first category also contains this other sentence. Those who die with non-virtuous minds, whether through remembering on their own or through being reminded by others, remember non-virtues such as attachment for as long as coarse discrimination remains. At the point of death, they experience physical pain. So this is in number 1. Number 2 is when those who are currently cultivating non-virtue die, they experience signs foretelling the effects of non-virtue they have engaged in. As if in a nightmare, many unpleasant images appear to them. Many unpleasant images appear to them. They seem to pass from light to darkness. So here, this is number 2, and it's showing that one who has this non-virtuous mind at the time of death sees various forms that aren't pleasant or aren't attractive, and has this experience of passing from sunshine into darkness, so into sunlight, into a dark place. So this is number 2. So again, when those who are currently cultivating non-virtue die, they experience signs foretelling the effects of non-virtue they have engaged in. As if in a nightmare, many unpleasant images appear to them. They seem to pass from light to darkness.
다 송바의 제반이도 디바 먹어 치부 사게던 딩 사게니 들려도 디바 먹어 치부 사게 송바제 디바 먹어 딩 사게 지발려도 디바 먹어 송바 디바 먹어 첨부 셰반네스 디바 치부 사게 사샤비 요바이나 안에 참마마도바 다다 통유 안에 제가 놓고 누모도바 참마마도바 도자 뭐 통고 통유 르라 동에 종신사 참마마도바 도자 통도는 그 르르동에 용거레스 그진 셰바탄 상가서 줍바바야라야 그진 셰바탄 간라 유바탄 간 라바탄 간라 유고 나가다 쳐버 뒤로 왔는데 지금은 와 간라 유바탄 샹지 중앙 진바슈야 수바슈야 우크동에 잡여서 왔는 거 저러다 근데 나갈은 용 봐서는 들이 그 왔는 지그레스 다 메두바 아니 메단 이도 가둔 담을 누구만로 칸에 보아 중앙 된도와 난 중앙에서 왔대 디바 먹어 집에서 하게 될래 네 지kal라면 대용 그래서 다
That's it.
Yeah.
So now, the next category, number 3, is dealing with those who have committed very large non-virtues. So it says, when those who have committed serious non-virtuous actions observe these unpleasant signs, so the signs that were just mentioned, they experience physical pain and their hair stands on end. They shake their hands and feet. Void urine and excrement, reach up toward the sky, roll their eyes back, drool, and more. So this is for someone who has created a large amount of non-virtue, and then Rinpoche went back and explained it. So they see many unpleasant signs, many distasteful signs are seen of the future and so forth, and they have a large amount of suffering, and the hairs, these hairs stand up on end, And then it says they shake their hands and feet. So Rinpoche showed the shaking of the hands and the feet, and they urinate, uncontrollably urinate and defecate. They reach up toward the sky. So, and then Rinpoche showed grabbing toward the sky. Roll their eyes back, drool, and more. So here are just the description of someone at the time of death who's engaged in a large amount of non-virtue. Dixon.
다 제바들로 데바 먹고 닌사게 있는 데바 먹고 치부사게래 나마 도자 용어는 가시 용어로 삼아 용어 말이스. 뭐든 드인들에도.
So the number 4 is showing that if the non-virtue hasn't been as great, then not all of these things will happen. So it says here, if they have been moderate in their non-virtue, then not all of these things will happen. Some will and some will not. So this is number 4. Let's take a short break, have snacks. Oh my gosh. Get gamba.
다 나바 테레도 나바 나주는 하다 녀 마투비 진에 타질어요도 what 윤지 마도도 어들 도바도 어떤 도바서 단녀와 나주네 하다 녀 마투비 진에 타질어요도 내가 고대다 하다 녀 바니들 나주에 말했어 내가 고소나 하다 녀 바니를 나주 매서 고소나 녀벌 나주 매서나 다우들 녀벌 나주에 뭐 무시해도 돼 다우 게르도와
다우 세나
디 다마도 오마들 디바치부사겐레 동해치부요아레스 어때 다만 용자 조사스마 디바 먹어 치부사겐들 나가는 조바 수바셔야다 칸 오완 종아도 좀 송송아 단 나주에 매서나 어떤 게르도와 어때 나주네 하다 녀바 마투비 진에 타지라 요도스 어떻게 고야에서 말에 나주 저와 녀바다 도와 저와 산이 마투비 네 예다다 돈도다 마타질 나주요 아레스 예다다 마타 돈도 타질 나주요 제가 나치 등에 베저 네 녀바다 나주 체슈레스 나주 체슈 네 녀바다 산이 마투비 진에 타질라 네 예다 돈도다 마타질 나주요 아레스 what 나바드레도 나바 텔만 모두
So now we're actually arriving at number 5. So number 3 deals with those who've committed serious non-virtues or large non-virtues. And then number 4 deals with those who've created a medium amount of non-virtue. If they have been moderate in their non-virtue, then not all these things will happen. Some will and some will not. And then number 5, wrongdoers suffer terrible agony at the moment of death. Such agony is found everywhere that beings are born, except among deities and hell beings. So again, once again, we have this seeming contradiction, because when we look at cyclic existence and we look at the greatest amount of agony, we would say is in the hell realm, the largest amount of agony or largest amount of suffering, and the greatest amount of happiness, we would say, is in the God's realm. Rinpoche, Garshine Chu Jika Nanche Namgyal Lobsang Garshine.
나주에서도 제가 나시 등에서 나주 말বে 제가 나시 동에 요나 나주 요로다 녀벌 예달 돈주 요로 녀벌 다 치슈 말베 나주 치슈로 녀벌 나주 메스나 왔다말레 데바치부 사겐들레 동에 치부 요거레 수바 슈거레 네 라바도 요야 다말 시에서 송아 어떤 게르도와 녀벌 나주 메스나 제무도와
So how can we say that a hell being is not suffering terrible agony at the time of death? So this is where it seems to become confusing. It seems to be contradictory because we have all of these descriptions of the agony that the hell beings go through, such as the arms being cut off and so forth, that we've described many times before, and the pleasantries that the gods experience. And now it's saying that that at the time of death there isn't this agony. This brings that question, brings the question, why has this been presented here? So we have to think about it. And that's number 5, is that wrongdoers suffer terrible agony at the moment of death. Such agony is found everywhere that beings are born, except among deities and hell beings. Digso.
Malebi Pato, Yuremune Kumbi, Dala Chabanjungosa, and Magi sent them going to show there. Tanji Magi sent them going to show a Tanji Jang, Chi Tsana, Dushi Masewala, Malebi Pato, Yuremune Kumbi, Dala Chabanjungos, and then Susu Lula Chabayungores, Dala Chabanjungo, Ti Wodo. Dala chabi wangi da mebanjuro nyane ne lula gawa jotesa susu lula gabu yungores tene padun rubi jo sa susu lula gabu jeba to wate paduk jores padun rubi jo tela juju dan shon la yang dala chaba ne jume jans juju de shon 네 주주 shimo drajung bas shone je marbe what to so nganye thwe ne to shobaka juju la shobatan dene ni cha pabare shimo shobatan dene ni shimo shobatan dene ni drajung shobatan dene ni de chone je yoro je gna ne juju de shimo ni de ta tombo juju de shimo ni la dala chaba yores Dala Chabanjume and Shiro Jitane, Kutoni Monsu Tusaro, Shiro Jitane, Bunki, Tanto Melentes, Ne Shiro Jitane, Ne Chabadote, Bungares, Tanto Melente, Puna, Matode, Jitu Chungutan, and our example, what the Kutoni Monsu Tusadu. And the child wanted to go, she should have never chat about this.
Okay.
Example, Matodens to Chongdon about this. Shimon on Dala Chabamanjung was Shimon, then Jabal Chabat Tresarwa, Dal Chabayomares. What about the Retrobat?
So number 6 is the next paragraph. At the time of death, whereupon discrimination will become unclear, beings are attached to the self with which they have long been familiar. After that, through the influence of attachment to the self, they think, I am ceasing to exist, and they crave embodiment. This causes the bardo, the intermediate state. Attachment to the self also occurs among stream enterers and once returners. But as they investigate it with wisdom, they reject it rather than assent to it. The way a powerful person dominates a weak person, attachment to self does not occur among non-returners. Here, what this is talking about is beings who are in the 8 levels of approaching and abiding. These 8 levels of approaching and abiding are found in the hearer's vehicle, and we find that Lama Tsongkhapa is stating that is an attachment to self that occurs in stream enterers and once returners, but they are able to see the difference because of their realization of the nature of reality. So here it says, but as they investigate it with wisdom, they reject it rather than assent to it, the way a powerful person dominates a weak person. Attachment to the self does not occur among non-returners. So there are these 8 categories of approaching and abiding. So the first is approacher to the fruit of stream enterer. The second category is abider in the fruit of stream enterer. The next is approacher to the fruit of once returner. And then the next is abider in the fruit of once returner. Then approacher to the fruit of a never returner. And then abiding in the fruit of never returner, and then the approacher to the fruit of a foe destroyer, and then abider in the fruit of foe destroyer. So that's what these words are referring to. These words are referring to levels in the hearer's vehicle that one goes through. And also, when one sees emptiness directly and has reach this, the path of seeing. The approacher, the fruit of stream enters at the path of seeing, as a translator's note. So at that path of seeing, the amount of attachment or the amount of aversion that they have has really diminished, has become much, much smaller. Let me rephrase this. Their attachment and their hatred have become very, very small because of the direct perception of emptiness. So this is another reason why we have this statement that they investigate it with wisdom, they reject it rather than to assent to it, the way a powerful person dominates a weak person. So the direct realization of emptiness that they previously had is more powerful than the misconception that kind of grasps at a self. So it's not possible for this craving of embodiment that propels to take place in the same way that it would in the case of an ordinary being. Diksong Rinpoche.
This one. Ta gi senta de go ne cho tsaji, magi senta de go ne cho tsane, ta somba loma de senta de go ne cho tre.
Lesa.
Somba loma de senta de bar cho nes, gwa da magwa. She bon, de maji jan, ne maji jan ron de rangi, teni kaya maden la jen ji jan, temba maji ba wos, teni chi te, ne dudu nika maden no sa. Ta loma de sen de me gun chewa de gwa da maga saba ina sa gen yores. Saba ina ko cheka lama de ku gwa da maga maden ba che. Maden du ta loma de se wa. O de sen de me gun Chenrezig de. What the shakal o de loma de sen de me gun chewa de what de doa da ngani ga yo mares.
Lesa.
Rendua.
So we've gone through the section on dying with a virtuous mind, so a virtuous mind at the time of death. We've gone through the section on dying with a non-virtuous mind, so a non-virtuous mind at the time of death. And now we've arrived at the ethically neutral mind at the time of death section. Again, that which hasn't been presented in Scripture, and that's literally the literal translation for Lungmaten, not presented or relied on in Scripture. But we use this ethically neutral because I think it makes more sense in English what it means, and what it refers to. It means that at the time of death, there isn't a virtuous state of mind. Or a non-virtuous state of mind. So if there is a state of mind which isn't among those two, virtuous or non-virtuous, then it's necessarily an ethically neutral state of mind, or a state of mind that hasn't been presented in Scripture. So that's what is meant by that. And it says, those who are currently cultivating neither virtue nor non-virtue, or have done neither, do not remember virtue and non-virtue, virtue and non-virtue, either on their own or at the urging of others. At death they have neither pain nor pleasure. So this is the ethically neutral person's mind at the time of death.
This one.
Experience.
Loma de Santa de Guncho, the Sun Saji, Gisanta de Gunchoa, Maggie Santa de Gunchoa, Loma de Santa de Guncho, Sun Sane, that you would the Legua. Gisanji Choane, Dushi Raba, Yubi Pala Inches, Dushi Tamuju Sene, Gisan Dujin, Loma de Santa Jute, Tedite, and Kumbashi, Gwa Layan, Tamba Menu La, Jenjijan, Tambashi Menu Sauce, Maguala Tatan Drayu, Duji Tamu, Joana, Chesen Tajila, Loma Tendos, what the Chesen Tamu Loma Tens de Legua. Gay Santa de Beconchoa, Magi Santa de Beconchoa, Chesen Rabba goes. Rabba goes, Chesen Tramu goes, what the Gay Santa de Beconchoa down, Loma Tenji Santa de Beconchoa, the Yomares, Chesen Tramu Loma Teres, what in the Legua.
Oh, I see. So now the section that the Jayan Sheba Loma Ten, the Ewa Yomare. Sache Yomare.
What did the Saji now the Majo, the
Okay. So we won't go through an outline in this section. So it says, dying with ethically neutral mind. So those who are currently cultivating neither virtue nor non-virtue, or have done neither, do not remember virtue and non-virtue either on their own at the urging of others. At death they have neither pain nor pleasure. So this is what is meant by ethically neutral mind. So we've completed at the time of death. So we've completed not the section on virtuous mind at the time of death. We've completed the section on non-virtuous mind at the time of death. And now there's some sort of completion once that paragraph is read. But again, Rinpoche is not saying that he's not giving the outline. There is one, but he didn't bring it. When you die with a virtuous mind, it lasts as long as there is coarse discrimination. But once subtle discrimination is activated, the virtuous mind stops and becomes an ethically neutral mind. At this point, you cannot retrieve the virtue with which you had become familiar, nor can others remind you. The same holds true for non-virtuous minds. All minds of death are ethically neutral after the onset of subtle discrimination. Basu Bandhu's Treasury of Knowledge auto-commentary says that both virtuous minds and non-virtuous minds are clear, and thus incompatible with the cessation of coarse consciousness at death. So what this is saying is when there is still a coarse discrimination present, you can have a virtuous or non-virtuous mind. If it's a virtuous or a non-virtuous mind, it is necessarily coarse discrimination or coarse awareness. But when it moves into a subtle awareness, at that point, one can no longer be converted to virtue or non-virtue, because all subtle states of consciousness, all subtle discrimination is necessarily that which hasn't been presented in Scripture or ethically neutral. So you can see the compatibility, why they chose ethically neutral, because it's neither virtue nor non-virtue. And so it describes what that which hasn't been presented in Scripture means. So if you have this ethically neutral state of mind at the time of death, at that point, you can't be urged to be converted because of the subtle state of consciousness you're abiding in. So virtue or non-virtue requires coarse discrimination.
Well, little bit all chesa the shabu juju but sugar.
Okay.
What the chesa raba goes the trauma causes to join the chesa trauma goes in home door. Chesa trauma goes shibale, Roma dematu, Gavadamo Mudua. Chesa raba goes Jabu.
So when we look at the example of Ling Rinpoche, who stayed for 14 days, abided for 14 days, and there was this subtle wind, the so there was in Ling Rinpoche's case, there was a ceasing of the breathing, but there was an internal heat that was present there. So at that point, was that a coarse discrimination that was taking place, or was there subtle discrimination that was taking place? So Rinpoche is just posing this question. Was it a coarse discrimination in Ling Rinpoche's case, or a subtle discrimination?
What the Nyabaja Mongolita with the Chesa Rapa goes
Chesen Rapa.
Rapa goes Madu, Chamagos Madu, Chamago Roma himself.
Okay. Okay. So, and there's many other examples of those who have abided after science would say they have died, but there's still this internal heat. So because there's this internal heat, it means that there's still this fire element, which means that there is necessarily coarse consciousness there. So we have to say, when going back to the question that was posed, in the case of Ling Rinpoche, is this a coarse consciousness or a subtle consciousness? Because the heat's present, it means that there's still fire element present. And if any among the four elements are present, or going through a dissolution process even, then it is necessarily coarse discrimination that's taking place. So we answer that by saying coarse discrimination because of the heat. Fire element means that there is necessarily coarse discrimination.
What another such a military Molo no nation Hawada, what the so has on the Jean waters, Marbe, Jean, to live do that day we use on Nagis and Shaju Sangoya, Tony Moya, Nanjo Samasan Daya, what in Jetua in our day, Dendrochin do what are.
So the reason that we are learning this is so that at the time of death, when we ourselves are experiencing a dissolution of our own elements, and our earth element is dissolving into our fire element, and our fire element is dissolving into our water. Other way. Our earth element is dissolving into our water element is dissolving into our fire element, and our fire element is dissolving into our wind element. When this is going on, we will know that we need to cultivate virtue, and we'll be able to remember our virtue that we've engaged in, and then generate the mind that aspires to enlightenment, and be able to generate a desire to emerge from cyclic existence and go for refuge, and think of virtuous things in order to experience a rebirth into the higher realms of cyclic existence after we die. So this is the reason for learning this, is so that when this dissolution process is happening to ourselves, we are able to cultivate a virtue so that we can have a good rebirth.
That deba chibuchi saken yeba ina chikalam to kule gawasen de mod yage laba ina ko gisen mod jusun debi de budngen to ko mare denul chemu zares. Deba chibu saken ina ya.
Less so.
And chikalam to ko gisen Julie Jaga Kul de 타시진 로바이나 and the Geshe Lharampa nego debachibun rebel mingmanas denrulje.
Oh, okay. But if there is someone who has cultivated a large amount of non-virtue, if they are shown some sort of method to cultivate virtue at the time of death, then also that type of person wouldn't have to experience the results of his or her misdeeds. They would be able to be born into the higher realms themselves if they've been presented with some sort of method for creating that kind of virtuous state of mind.
But
and even those who have cultivated virtue, if at the time of death they somehow are think about non-virtue or are influenced by, and that's it, if they are at the time of death influenced by non-virtue, then they will go to the lower realms of cyclic existence if that influence of non-virtue is present, even if they've engaged in great amounts of virtue.
Hindu Varanasi name
Oh, Loju, okay. So it says the source for this information is Vasubandhu's Treasury of Knowledge auto commentary. This is Vasubandhu's own commentary on the Abhidharma Kosha. So there's the Abhidharma Kosha, the Treasury of Knowledge, or the Treasury of Knowledge, and then there's Vasubandhu's own commentary on the Treasury of Knowledge, and it says that both virtuous minds and non-virtuous minds are clear and thus incompatible with the cessation of coarse consciousness or death. So Rinpoche is saying that when he was younger, he was in Varanasi at the Sanskrit University, and he had a teacher, and the teacher was giving an explanation of the Treasury of Knowledge auto commentary. In the Treasury of Knowledge auto commentary, we had, as students, been debating, because we debated the Abhidharma Kosha, so we knew this information. We had debated this information, and our teacher gave us the outline, the categories of the auto commentary, of Vasubandhu's auto commentary, but said that he wasn't able to explain it. So instead of actually explaining this text, he would tell us stories, and he would teach us about various things in India and Hinduism and so forth, because he didn't understand this text, wasn't able to explain it. So Rinpoche was just remembering when he was in the university and the situation with his teacher.
Magi sent Naba Sebres, Savi, and Chesen Chiban Joatan, Mutunos, Chesen Tamadan Tungumaris, Chesen Tamat Luma Tende, and the Gish and the Magi sent so, Loma Temaro. What the Chisen Tamala Gawada Magi say you Maris, and the Gawada Magi sent Nabashin to say you sent Chisen Cheba Joadam, Matubish Rosa. Chisen Tamad Loma Tero, Loma Tero Gish and the Magati sent Tumaro. What about that?
Ale, Chenrezig Rinpoche, Ale. So Vasubandhu's Treasury of Knowledge auto commentary says that both virtuous minds and non-virtuous minds are clear and thus incompatible with the cessation of coarse consciousness at death. So it's virtuous and non-virtuous minds, it's saying, are mutually exclusive with the subtle consciousness. So they're mutually exclusive with the states of subtle consciousness. And it's saying because they virtuous and non-virtuous minds are clear. And here, once again, the subtle consciousness is necessarily that which hasn't been presented in Scripture or ethically neutral. So therefore, it's incompatible. So Vasubandhu presents it as such, because if the time after coarse consciousness is necessarily ethically neutral, then it's neither virtue or non-virtue. Therefore, there's no common locus. Therefore, they are mutually exclusive or contradictory.
And Mugo Shigente and do the more Tomcham.
Oh.
So do the more Tomchan. Mugo Shigente and dread what the do more doom is. Go again the many are doom. Mugo Shibane, Nashi Rutune, Lun Dor Shete, Tambo, Rutu Toman Judas, Rutu more Tomores, Hinkala two battles, Hinkala two battle. Tomchandores, Goa Shiba the men and Dojins, the Tom with men at Tomchana, and the Nika Nashi pose, what the Nashi Poya the Hikan Pumudes. Tom Nashi Shusa the Hinkal Injero, Pamikota use Nika or the Sugar Pondu and Pures, then Terminal Town, Goa Shiba men at Tane. And he got Nashi Poem, Nashi Posa. Tombo Kotaku Yuso, Nashi Kanshu Bate, Lujin Hika Jonsins, Tombo Kota Yuso, Pamaki Kotaku Yuso, Nashi Shusate, Hikal Kedures, Kotaku Yuso, Nashi Kanshu Bate, Lujin Hika Jonsins, Shusato the Lujin Hika Tredures. Tama Shukane, Poa Tenin, Toma Juba Inosa. Tama Posata, Tom Shusa no Nechibare, Juba Ino. Tatana Luigi, Toma, Dune, Nika Mene, Nika Dune, and Tatana Luigi, Toma, Dune, Nikas. Doing you got to Magawashi can share, and then pen you got to get the Gawashi can marba. Then pen at the bear. Then pen out doing the bottle, Dubane, Masunja Shibasha was a what about Sandra?
Okay, so now we start number 3. Where heat gathers. Among those who are currently cultivating non-virtue, consciousness leaves the body coming down from the upper parts, which becomes cold first. When it reaches the heart, it leaves the body. The consciousness of someone who is currently cultivating virtue leaves coming up from the lower parts, and the body becomes cold from the lower parts. In both cases, consciousness leaves from the heart. The point at which consciousness first enters the fertilized ovum becomes the body's heart. Consciousness finally leaves the body from where it first entered. given that at first the heat of the body either descends from the upper parts and given that at first the heat of the body either descends from the upper parts and gathers in the heart, or ascends from the lower part and gathers in the heart. After that, though Vasubandhu and Asanga do not say so, you should understand that in both cases, the remaining heat in the body gathers into the heart from the other end of the body. So here this completes this section. It's showing that if there is someone who's currently cultivating non-virtue, the consciousness leaves the body from the upper parts and descends, reaches the heart, and then leaves the body. If someone's cultivating virtue, then it comes from the lower parts, and then it becomes, if it comes if one is cultivating virtue, then it comes from the lower parts, and the body becomes cold from the lower parts. And then it says, in both cases, consciousness leaves from the heart. So the consciousness itself leaves from the heart area in the case of someone cultivating virtue or non-virtue. It says the point at which consciousness first enters the fertilized ovum becomes the body's heart. Consciousness finally leaves the body from where it first entered. So when we're saying first entered, it's the union of the male and female secret substances where we were actually first, our consciousness first abided. So that's where we're speaking of. We're speaking of what was created by this union at the time of our inception. So that is where we eventually leave through. So the heart area is what was created first by this union, and it's where it's where the consciousness entered. That's what it is. It's where the consciousness entered this union of substances, and also in the same place where the consciousness will exit. Okay. So the next section is how you reach the intermediate state after death. In Jayan Sheba's commentary, we find 14 different categories. So we aren't going to go over that today. We're just going to end here. And in the future, we'll go over it slowly. And I'll find those stages also. Obviously, everyone can look it up. But I'll find those 4 stages that go from this kind of coarse consciousness to the clear light consciousness. I might have them actually. I'll go do it. So we'll do the concluding mandala offering and dedication prayer. The fundamental ground is scented with incense and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha land and offer it. May all sentient beings enjoy this pure realm. I dedicate whatever virtues I have collected for the benefit of the teachings and of all sentient beings, and in particular for the essential teachings of Venerable Losang Drapa to shine forever. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Guru. I dedicate all this virtue to emulate the knowledge of the hero Manjushri and likewise Samantabhadra as well, with whatever dedications praised as supreme by all the conquerors who traverse the 3 times. I also dedicate all my roots of virtue for the sake of auspicious deeds. In that pure land surrounded by snowy mountains, you are the source of all benefit and happiness. All-powerful Avalokiteshvara Tenzin Yatso, may you stay until samsara's end. I pray for the long life of the precious Khensur Rinpoche, upholder of scriptural and realization doctrines, the spiritual friend who trained extensively in the 5 great philosophical texts, with exceptional wisdom and perseverance. Tuji Rinpoche, Lucy Shapi